I'm Harriet Davey, Harriet.blend, whatever you want to call me. I'm a 3D artist who is working a lot with like digital characters, humans, non-humans, and the world building that comes along with that. I'm going to play just my showreel whilst I kind of speak about my work a little bit so you get an idea of what I'm up to. I do a mixture of short films, animations, but also more recently kind of live performances using Unreal Engine. So we've done, I have a collective, a fashion collective, and we've published on SYKY. And before that, we have been doing like digital performances where we have a performer in a motion capture suit with physical fashion on, and then digital fashion that is then live, capturing the performance of the model and being live rendered in Unreal Engine. So I'm doing a mixture of world building for... It's very different when you build for game environments versus for animations and things. And we'll get into that later on. Everything is just still playing. Yeah, so I do a lot of like face motion capture as well. And yes, why 3D? As I mentioned, like for real-time performances, you have to build an entire world. Everything has to make sense because you're not sure. It's the same for video games. You know, you can see it from a lot of different angles. Everything has to be thought out. But for the kind of rendering that I'm talking about today, it's all about faking things. It's about extending past the camera and kind of what the viewer doesn't see and hiding things. And I kind of wanted to do a little exercise where you look at these pictures and you think what is outside of the camera, or how are these kind of environments built, and to think of maybe how it looks, and then I will show you for a few different pieces. So these ones look perhaps like quite desolate environments, and that there's an environment piece extending outside of the picture. But if I show you how these ones look behind the camera, there's literally nothing seen from the other side of the camera. So the foliage I have only extends as far as the camera can see because it's not worth the computer time, like trying to render any more foliage. I have only 2 trees when it looks like maybe there's a forest kind of receding into the mist. And there's always a lot of lights and a lot of cameras, which is maybe not technically the right way to do it, but it's the way that I think looks best. For instance, this piece, it feels like a really lush, dense kind of forest environment, and if I show you the behind the scenes, it is absolutely not. There is only the smallest area of foliage. This piece here that is so nicely like blocking off the camera, it kind of feels like the camera is there and this is in front of it, and we're kind of reaching through to find this creature. It's literally just another plant that I placed in front of the camera to give it this look. And this is basically the common theme for all of these pieces. So this has the same if we look at the mountains. So these mountains in the background, this ridge is just to add a little bit of depth, to have like a light shining from behind. You can see it looks kind of almost like a realistic mountain range, even from the camera view, like non-rendered. And if we go to the above view, again, it's not a realistic mountain range at all. And I'm tricking the camera and the eye, and I'm having these like huge mountains in the background because you don't want to have to build an entire mountain range. We can just place like 3 huge mountains that don't physically make sense, but they look good. And this then also applies to like editorial or less realistic environments, so stuff that isn't necessarily a landscape. Maybe this one's more interesting, it's a bit more fashion-y. The fashion is from Susa Voss. She's a really talented fashion designer. We worked together on a few pieces together, and this piece I even ended up blurring the background a little bit because it didn't work out quite how I wanted it, which is great if you're just doing still pieces, not animations. And it's good to have an environment because like you see these shadows. You could paint this environment in, right? You could Photoshop it in, but we have the reflection and the shadows of the character, and so the way that they interact with the light feels very cohesive. The environment itself is a mess. There's a kind of a cube that I subdivided, cut the front and the top off, curved it round. There's a light that clips through. That's why we have this harsh edge. There's like 8 different lights pointing in different directions. So each kind of small light that shows under the foot was a different area light that was shining down. So yeah, it can be messy, and that's okay. But why is having an environment important? Here we have by Nina Doll, who I work with really closely. She's part of Sublimation. A really beautiful digital fashion piece. It's sat in a white cube. It looks gorgeous, but it's soulless. Not because of the fashion, but because of like the lighting. It feels like it was placed there. We've photographed it. It's lookbook, which is fine. That's another style, but we're missing a lot of character from it. And I wanted to show this piece. It's a few years old, so obviously the animation is not quite where I'm at these days, but I had this idea. I was commissioned by LNCC and Y3 to make some editorial videos. This was the third one I did. And so I had this idea that I wanted this really desolate landscape with these bones from kind of some ancient huge creature that died, and like everywhere the creature died there would be flowers. And I had my story for it, and I think that I never communicated any of this with the client, but a lot of this came through, and when they spoke about it with press and stuff, it gives people something else to talk about that isn't just the fashion. Like they talk about the characters, they talk about the world, they imagine their own selves in these characters. Like, we're not just showing the clothes on mannequins, because that's great and you can do that, but to give like people something kind of relatable to look to, I think is really powerful, and yeah, works really well. This was a piece that we made for SYKY. So there's three of us. Judith is making physical fashion, which then informs the digital fashion that Nina makes, and I'm handling the environment and the characters and the rendering. And here, a little kind of tidbit is the environments all look, I wanted it to look as if like it was shot on different days with different weather conditions, like kind of walking around as if when you're scouting a real location, you would be like, oh, let's shoot this person here, let's shoot this one 100 meters over to the right. And I wanted it to have this kind of feeling, that they're in the same physical environment, but not from the same shot. And so all I did was kind of rotating the landscape slightly each time, and then changing the background sky, which is just an image. There's no real sky here, there's no real cloud, there's a little bit of fog kind of poking up in the background, but all of the clouds are fake. I actually made them using Photoshop. I kind of found some pictures of sky, collaged them together, and then used like the AI generative fill to fix the bits I didn't like. And yeah, it feels like we have a sort of sunrise, sunset, dusk, different feeling for all of these characters. I'll quickly take you through a case study. So this was the piece where we had an environment in the game engine. We had the fashion that was originally built to work in Unreal Engine, and we wanted to make some renders that felt like they came from the same world as the game engine that we'd built, and also staying true to like a similar character, kind of like characteristic, but a different character because this character was based on a performer. And then trying to get the materials and stuff right in Blender. And so we had, again, a really beautiful outfit that worked in Unreal Engine, but if you zoomed in too close, it was a bit janky. So I had to rebuild it a little bit with the materials in Blender. The workflow when you're working with characters with DAZ is a little bit complicated. I'm not going to go into it in depth today because it's a whole thing, but the basics are you have a character this is my workflow. You can choose other programs and softwares and things for characters. I make them in DAZ Studio, we export them in a T-pose. This goes to Clo or Marvelous. The clothes are then made because we're using like bodies that are not necessarily the default body in Clo, so we want to make sure that the clothes fit them properly. I will then pose the character. If it's animated, you can also do it at this stage. I then export that animation that starts in a T-pose, then goes to the pose, and I give that over to Nina, who does her magic in Clo 3D, and then I get everything back. And so I get the model and the clothes as kind of like two separate files, and then I start to put it together. Yeah, so I work on materials which were all rebuilt from scratch in Blender. When you're working with digital fashion stuff, the files can get really, really heavy. And so for this one, because the hair was really heavy on the model, like all of the clothing was like gigabytes almost of files. It was insane. My computer couldn't handle it. So instead I just blocked out some cubes where the character was roughly posed so I could start working on the lighting. And yeah, this was a simple kind of photography curve that I started off with. I wanted this to feel like I was a set designer and I'd gone and bought a bunch of rocks and plants from the outside, and we sort of sprinkled them around in the set. And I use, as I said before, I use so many lights, which you would never be able to have a light behind your model this close to your head IRL. And I think that's how we can get away with things in 3D, is by just pumping everything up a little bit more than you could ever do in the real world, being a bit more dramatic, and it works really well. Keeping this attention to detail, so I usually, not always, it kind of depends on the lighting, but quite often people's characters look a bit flat in 3D, and that's because they don't have like this iris reflection or the pupil reflection in the eye. And I learned actually only a couple of years ago that in Hollywood films they have special lights in the studios that are just built to reflect in the eyes so that people feel more alive, because if you don't have like the correct reflection in the eyes, you feel a bit dead and people don't like it when they watch it. So making sure that you always have a really nice like circular small white reflection in at least one of the eyes goes like such a long way in making the characters feel realistic. Yeah, and then I check over the final textures. I like to do a render without the character just because it's a bit faster, and I can make sure that all the materials are right, and we end up with some renders like this. And yeah, it comes together really well. And I always love photographing the pieces from different angles from above so you can see a bit more of the environment. Yeah, keep going, I think there's not much left. Yeah, plugins that I will go over today. These are the plugins right now that I'm using. It kind of has changed over the years. I fall in love with some, I don't like some, and then I kind of push along, and I've tried a lot of plugins over the years. Most of them, well, at least half of them are free, and a couple of them are built in already that I'm going to go over. For foliage, like Botanique is incredible. It's what I've used. If you see any foliage in any of my works, they're from Botanique. There's other ones, there's some other really popular ones. It's kind of like up to you to find which one you want, but I would recommend getting a cheap paid foliage plugin just to save you having to make all of the grass and stuff yourself. Yeah, BlenderKit is also really great for making materials. Like some of the leather ones I've used in fashion have been like from BlenderKit and then changed, and yeah, but I'll go over those plugins when we use them. Let's get into the tutorial. So I hope everyone has Blender open. I did mention that it would be great if everyone has a file that they already have a character, or they have some fashion or something that they would like to show off. If you don't, I have a folder that I forgot to, I will share it, and I will drop it in the chat so that if you don't have anything, you can just download my file and use it. I have to find the chat now. And keep going with the questions, we'll answer them all at the end. But yeah, you should be able to download that file if you need it. So this is a super old piece of mine. I kind of wanted to revamp something instead of making something new. It's a bit like pulling from the archives as a designer, which I think is also kind of a nice nod to fashion. I will maybe, I'm sure everyone already knows Blender, but in case not, I've got my mouse here, so you can see what buttons I'm pressing, and also when I press on the keyboard, you should be able to see that, so it should help with following along a little bit. So I'm going to give...
Quick question.
Yeah.
I think that folder is empty that you shared.
Oh. There's not a FBX file in it?
No, yeah, it seems to be empty.
Okay, let's... Maybe if I share the file itself.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe
it could be...
Could
be this. It can be any object. It doesn't have to be a character. I won't be going over any of the character materials or anything like that. Like right now, the setup is kind of the same as just deleting the default cube. I haven't changed the lighting. I've just deleted everything and put the character in. So yeah, you can also put in, do you know Suzanne? If anyone doesn't have anything, you can go to add mesh and then monkey, and we have Suzanne, the monkey that lives in Blender. So you can put her in if you don't have anything to work with. Okay, let's do plugins first. So we go to edit, preferences, and if you go to add-ons, the first one everyone absolutely has to turn on is ANT landscape. So all you have to do is go to add-ons and then click the little tick box, and it's going to turn on your ANT landscape. This is going to allow you to really quickly add in meshes that are like landscape meshes. Anything else to turn on? There's a bunch of things that are useful. I kind of one time went through and turned on almost everything that was in Blender, and it then slowed down Blender a lot, so I wouldn't do that. But things that are built in, I think dynamic sky is also built in. There's some like extra mesh objects. This can be useful. This gives you, when you click Shift A, you have like these archimesh, bolt, things like this. So you can use it for kind of architectural stuff. Other than that, there's a light one. Tri-lighting is also great. This is also built in, and you can turn this on. Basically, it gives you like three lights set up. I'll quickly show you these plugins. Maybe we'll go with them later, actually. Okay. First, we're going to do a super simple environment. Kind of like a... You don't have these options and preferences. I'm reading the chat because you don't have the landscape? It should be there by default, but it's in extension. You can also maybe go to get extensions and then search for it. They've updated this in Blender, so it's kind of only recently that it's here. I'm gonna up these. Okay, people are sorting it out in the chat. I think it should be okay. Yeah, I mean, check the add-ons and then also checking get extensions. It should be in one of these and you should be able to turn it on. I'll give everyone a moment just to make sure they've got that done. Okay, so first off, we're going to add in a mesh, just a plane. So we go Shift A, mesh, Shift A, mesh, plane. And we have one of the most... Do you want me to write it in the chat? Landscape, ANT, try lighting. There you go. So I have this plane in the space. I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode. I'm going to go to the edge select, and I'm going to select the edge, just the one at the back of the model, and then I click E on the keyboard for extrude, and if we click Y, it's then going to be constrained just to the Y axis, so we can move it up, and we get two sides of a square, of a sphere, of a cube. We're going to click then the edge and press Ctrl B. This is to bevel it, and if you move your mouse around, you'll see that you can change the size of it. If you then scroll on your scroll wheel, you'll be able to change how many segments there are on this. And we kind of want to take it to not too many, but somewhere around there. We just want to make like a really simple photography curve. And if you press tab again, you'll notice that it has this kind of banding on it, which is fine. We can get rid of that by clicking on the object again, right click and shade smooth. And it should look nice and smooth. Now we just want to resize it, so I press S to scale. And we can make it really big. It doesn't matter so much. You can also, if you wanted more of a severe curve, you can kind of resize it on different axes to however you want. Then I'm going to move it down just so the character's toes are almost touching, just below. Yeah, and the sizing needs to probably be a bit bigger. Something like that. And I'm actually going to move everything up just so it sits above the grid of Blender. And if I hop over into render view, you can see that we just have a really nice seamless curve. And I'm going to hide and use the default HDRI. Yeah, we have like a really nice curve. You don't really see where it starts or ends once we have this really flat lighting. Like that. Let me know if you need me to do this again. At any point, it can be a little bit complicated. But no one's typing, so I'm assuming everyone's good. Okay, I think everyone's good. And I'm going to rename this to curve background. And then we can hide this. We can come back to this again. I just wanted to show you like the two different background creations. So if you manage to get the landscape creation, the landscape add-on turned on, then when you go Shift A, you should see, if we go Mesh, there's now a landscape option. And if you click that, we have a tiny, it's usually tiny, depends on the scale of your scene, but usually pretty small landscape here at the bottom. Make sure you don't click off it, because we have a menu down here, and as soon as you click off it, the menu disappears. I don't know why they've done it like this, but it does. So I clicked off it, oops, I'm going to delete it and add it in again. So Shift A, Mesh, Landscape. Yeah, so we have a bunch of settings here on the left. For the kind of beginning, we can ignore a lot of them. Things like, I'll go from the top of the stuff that's important. For the drop-down menu at the top, you have a lot of different kind of defaults, presets for very basic backgrounds and landscapes. So one that I really love to use would be the Lakes one, and there's two different versions. There's a Lakes 1, which is flat, and there's a Lakes 2, which has mountains in it. And if anyone's looked in depth at my work, this is probably the one that you would notice the most. It's like pretty much the basis I use for a lot of my pieces, because I think it's really nice having water in a piece. Just reflections and things always help selling a scene. Some other nice presets would be just a default or default large. It's like a nice mountain. Then we also have, for instance, the gully, which is this kind of like riverbed that goes through some cliffs, and then there's also like a river one. And yeah, I mean, feel free to explore them in your own time. Is it also my background? Yes. I think it probably was one of the Lakes one. I don't know where this file is. I'd have to go back and find it, but I'm sure it's Lakes 2. So I'm gonna, let's go for the classic. We're gonna go Lakes 2, and you'll notice if you zoom in, it looks pretty low poly, which we don't really want if we're using it as like the main feature of the environment. So to solve this, we can increase the mesh size. Right now it's 2. I'm going to bump it up to 4 by 4. And if I undo this, oops, oh, okay, it doesn't undo that, wait. But you see, if I go back to 2 by 2, it doesn't, it's almost like it expands the way this add-on works is it takes a plane and it kind of deforms it based on some different maths and graphs and things. And this doesn't expand the entire, it doesn't just go make it bigger. This adds like more deformation. So it makes it a little bit more detailed as well. So this mountain was already here, and now it's adding more kind of around the edge. And yeah, you can also go wild. You can make it 10 by 10 and you can end up with like a super nice, almost, oh, yeah, super nice kind of almost puddly sort of look. For me, it's a little bit much. I might just stick to like 5x5, something like that. If we go to the random seed, this is a way of shuffling how it looks basically. So you can increase this number, and it's just going to recalculate each time based on the number. The subdivisions, I don't usually tweak it at this point because you can always go and subdivide it again later on with your modifiers. The depth you can also change a little bit. The noise size is going to be how big the deformation is. So if you also drop that, then you're going to have it more detailed. And yeah, you can kind of play around with that. If you increase the height of the displacement, you'll notice that there is also a maximum. So unless you're trying to make a tabletop mountain, you don't really need to bother with that. I like to keep it a bit not too high, kind of subtle. Yeah, something like that. And then I'm going to scale it up because it's still probably going to be too small. And I like to place the character over a flatter area, and I would say maybe if we're going to see the character from the front, we can also move the landscape so that we see more of it behind them. So maybe even rotating it and putting it, yeah, I think something like that. And right now you'll also see if you hop over into render view that they have no materials. Is someone speaking? Is someone trying to ask a question? Or it's glitching?
I'm not sure, maybe it was just like accidentally, but yeah, we'll figure it out. Feel free to drop your question in the comment section and we'll get back to it. Cool.
Nice. Yeah, so they have no materials right now, which is obviously going to be an issue. So we can fix this. Another add-on that I mentioned in the beginning talk is that I also love Blender Kit. It used to be built in with Blender, however, I think you have to install it manually now. It also logs me out for some reason. I'm going to log back in. It's also free. You just have to have a Google account and then you can log into it. Just doing it on the other screen. Okay, it's logged in. And Blender Kit is really great. They have a bunch of free models. These are all logs. You can also pay for the models, but they have a bunch of free models. They have HDRIs, even like full scenes that you can install. I pretty much only use it for the materials. And if we head on over to our landscape and we click the landscape plane and come down here to get, you won't have this add-on, so it's okay to not have it, but I'm just going to show you how I quickly do it. I'm going to find the liquid, good one, and just throw the first water material on. That's fine. If you don't have the add-on enabled, we can also make a water material quite quickly by making a sort of glass material. So I'm going to go new material. We can bring the roughness down, transmission up, make sure that we have a lot of specular, and it's a glass material. It's not going to behave quite the same, but it's also good enough just to fake it for now. And Blender Kit also has some really nice kind of like ground materials as well. So like if I want a dirt, let's put this wet mud. Oops. I'm not sure what the fail is about. Yeah, but we can see that we have this like super nice, muddy, dirty one. Sometimes the scales are off and you just have to fix them. Cool. Cool. Okay, and if I want to add any foliage into this, I have to find my My add-on is down here. Too many plugins turned on. Again, don't worry that you don't have this add-on. You can get the add-on and then come back and watch this later. You have to select the plane or mesh that you want the add-on, the foliage to be scattered along, and then we can go to make sure we're in Botanique and add a new scatter. They have like preset biomes of plants and things. I might go for like a frosty grass even, and it just goes ahead and scatters it all across the landscape, and it also looks super nice and it's really fast. Something I really like, as I showed you in one of the examples, is drawing where the flowers should be. And so all I have to do is go to weight paint. I'm going to hide this for now, and if you go ahead and draw some patterns, you can also do this. It could be nice if you wanted to make like a symbol of plants in the ground and then photograph it from above. If you had like a logo or something, you can just like paint it in. I'm just doing really roughly, and head on back to object mode. We enable this again and then go down to density, and I set it to the weight paint group that I just painted, and just like that it sits along the lines that I painted. Yeah, and it looks pretty realistic. Obviously, if you're going to zoom in, the grass is quite flat and it kind of grows into the environment and clips through it, but unless anyone is really pedantic and looking at your artwork that closely, it shouldn't matter too much. Yeah, and they also have, for instance, assets that you can put in alone. So I can put in this dead tree, and it's gonna be huge. You just scale it down. Yeah, and we can have trees and things in the environment. You'll notice that the viewport is lagging now a little bit. Like I have this mesh is quite complicated. It was something I sculpted in VR, so it has quite a lot of polygons because I never remeshed it actually. And as soon as you've got a lot of, because this is a lot of particles, right? It's using a particle system to spread it across. And then the tree is also quite a high poly mesh. Like when you have these, it's going to really slow down your viewport. So you can even hide it when you're working on other stuff, hide the tree, and it should be a bit faster. Something else I recently started using is a lot of fog. So I now have a add-on, this Alt-Tab Easy Fog, that I think was quite cheap, that I'm using. It is also quite easy to build your own fog. I just did it to speed things up, but to build our own kind of fog on the ground, we can go Shift A, add in a cube, just a basic cube, and kind of scale it almost as big as your, about almost as big as your environment. And then we're going to go to Shader Editor, give it a new material, get rid of the principled BSDF, we don't need it. We go Shift A and add in a principled volume, and you drag the volume into the volume, and now we have a nice thick fog. Obviously it's way too dense, so we can drop the density down to like 0.01. Okay, it's probably not enough density now. Something like this. Yeah, and what you can do is, using nodes, you can also add a gradient to it, in which you could have like no fog at the top and fog at the bottom, or you can add a noise texture and then have it kind of animated if you want. Like there's so many options with the fog. You can change the color of it as soon as you have, for instance, let's do an area light that's shining into the fog, and I'm going to change the color to red and make it really bright so you can see what's happening. So as soon as you're having like lights interacting with the fog, you can get some really nice, it's a little too bright, really nice effects. And when they're inside the fog, you see, it kind of helps also to visualize how the lighting works inside of Blender, like how area lights look. So we can have this area light, which you'll notice is a bit annoying to select. It's kind of hidden in the cube, that we can move around, and it interacts with the fog. And if you had, for instance, like a spotlight that was really thin and narrow, you could make like fake God rays and things like that. So having a little bit of fog just scattered around the light also really helps for giving a bit of drama to the piece. I'm gonna... Oh no, we'll keep the fog in. We don't need to hide it for now. And yeah, the fog can also work if we had the curved background, for instance. I'm gonna hide the landscape. Just because you can mix and match these kind of techniques. Now, because there's no lighting, it's a bit hard to see, but it can give also a nice effect with this background. I will go into this background a little bit more actually. So something else I like to do is to give it a metallic material. So we can go over to the material, bring the metallic up, roughness down, specular up, change the color maybe to be... we can go either bright or dark with this. There's also no lighting right now. So if you ever have a metallic object in your scene and it's not looking good, it's not the material's fault, it's probably because the lighting is bad, unfortunately. But it means it's easy to fix. Like, you can have very beautiful metal texture. Maybe you downloaded a material online and it has like all this like nice scratches and things, but you don't see it because the lighting... To make the metallic material look nice, you have to have like a lot of lighting that bounces off it. And with the default Blender lighting setup, there's nothing. Like right now, it's just this gray all around it. And there's kind of two ways that you can light your scene. And I used to only use HDRIs. Well, when I was starting out, I would use like just point lights and stuff. And then I kind of switched over to using HDRIs because I thought this is what everyone's doing to make things look realistic. It's like what the industry is doing when they're working on VFX. Like, they want to use HDRIs. And there's a place for HDRIs. I don't really use them that much anymore, but I will go over them as well, just in case anyone needs a refresher. So we can head on over to your world properties. Yeah, this is your background right now that's built into Blender. We're going to click on the yellow blob and go to environment texture. It's going to turn pink. Pink in Blender, if you ever see something that's this gorgeous shade of magenta, it just means you're missing a texture. So yeah, our environment has no texture. We're going to go open, and I have a bunch of HDRIs that I keep in a folder. I mostly use them for kind of look dev now, for like if I'm working on a piece and I don't want to do the lighting yet, I just use it for that. You can download them for free. I think I have the tab open here. There's the incredible website called HDRI Haven. I think they even have a plugin now that you can put it directly into Blender, but I'm old school and I like having them in a folder and just doing it manually. But their sunset ones are really beautiful. They have indoor ones, outdoor ones. If anyone doesn't know about HDRI Haven, you need to. Yeah, and I find for me, I kind of like the indoor ones. I think the outdoor ones, for instance, like this one, you'd think, oh, it's going to be really nice. It's going to be all like outdoorsy, but the reflections you get are just really plain. You just see the sky. So I like to make sure that when I'm choosing HDRIs, I pick ones that have a lot of interesting stuff going on at the top of the image. So this one now we see because we have all of these bits of building at the top, we then get to see that reflected in the background. And something else, I see a lot of people rendering pieces where you can still see the HDRI. This is, for me, like a big no-no. It's kind of something that people automatically can tell it looks off. And to hide it, all you have to do is head over here to your render properties, scroll down to film, and hit transparent. And now we're going to hide the HDRI from the view. It's still there, it's still lighting up the scene, but we don't see it, which is good. No one wants to see your HDRI. Sorry. Yeah, and you can also drop your HDRI to like a 0.1 strength just to provide a bit of lighting that's overall the entire scene, but not like the focal lighting. So it's kind of giving a bit to the background, a bit of ambient lighting with interest. It's not just a plain ambient occlusion across the whole thing. And if you're doing hyper-realistic stuff, let's say let's bring back our background, let's add in a sun. The sunlight, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the sun lamp in Blender. I struggle to make it look good, and maybe that's my skill issue, but I've only ever used it when I'm doing like architectural things that have to look realistic. Like we can have a sun, a bit of HDRI, make sure the sun kind of matches up with HDRI, sun strength, and we can get like a nice, yeah, realistic, I guess, looking lighting. But for me, I kind of wonder why make something that looks like the real world. Okay, the character doesn't, but why recreate the real world when we can do something that's a bit more interesting? And yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and hide it. I don't want it. And I'm actually gonna completely delete my HDRI, or just turn the strength down to 0 and show you my favorite lighting setup. I love a kind of classic portrait setup. So the other add-on I mentioned with Try Lighting, you can go Shift A and then add 3-point lights, making sure that you've clicked on an object. What this is going to do, it's always the wrong scale. I don't know why. I'm going to just hide the cube for now. But it's going to give you 3 lights that are all tethered like to the origin point of this object. Obviously I have the face separated on this file. Okay, it's dark so I can't see. I have the face separated into a mesh, and the origin point is completely in the wrong spot, so I'm gonna just change that. Yeah, so now the lights are tracking to the face. And if we move these lights all in, they're way too far away. Kind of move them something like this. And they're too high up as well. I'm being super rough because I don't use this all the time. I'm normally doing it kind of myself from scratch. And now if I head over, you can see that we've got some lighting. So we have a back, a fill, and a key. And this is like very traditional photography lighting terms. This is how a lot of photographers light up their work. I'm gonna hide the camera because it's annoying me. And so the key light should always be quite strong, just so you can kind of see the face. Your backlight, for me, I like a backlight that's quite big. And you'll see, if I head over to orthographic view, it depends on your subject. If you have a lot of glass materials, the bigger the light, the bigger the reflection. And if we make the light smaller, the reflections in glass and metals and things will be a lot smaller. And this completely depends on what you're trying to show off. Sometimes you want like a really big soft light. Sometimes you want to show these like smaller reflections, which can look nicer. But the backlight, I will quite often make a tall one that's sort of the same height as the character, throw it behind, and then it helps to separate the character from the foreground. The fill light is just there to fill in a little bit extra of the face, and it's probably too bright because you don't want to see the fill like that much. And yeah, it looks okay. It looks quite rough, just because like the way these lights are set up by default is not quite the way I normally do it. So I'll go ahead and delete them and show you the normal way that I do it from scratch. So we start off no lighting, Shift A, light area. You can also be, I also love a very dramatic kind of overhead, bright light. Something like this could be really nice for this piece. But I always start off, actually I always start off with the backlight. I'm gonna scale it up a little bit, bring the width down. And when I'm setting up things, I always like to use the keyboard shortcuts, like one from the front, 3 from the side, 7 from the top. That just helps speed things up. I don't usually bother tracking the light to the object. And if we bring back the cube, You see that we have a little bit of interference here, like with the fog. Yeah, it looks good. Backlight, you can also have a bit of fun with. Change the color of it. This is kind of what's going to add drama to the piece. Let's make it pink. And then, yeah, same way as the kind of example one. We go for a key light on the side. Maybe even they name the other way around, key and fill. I might have that wrong. Someone might have to fact check for me. And for this one, I like to keep it quite small, just because the way I have like skin shaders set up on my characters, they're really shiny and reflective. And if you have a light that is too big, you just get like washed out skin and large areas of kind of white, which on like a lighter skin character isn't such an issue. Like when you're lighting darker skin characters, it's definitely something you have to be a bit more aware of. Is not to like wash out the skin, because it's something that happens a lot more easily with digital skin than real skin from my experience. So yeah, with making sure that the light is not too bright. There's a few different ways to turn down the brightness of the light. You can, number one, change the power. Obviously, that makes a lot of sense. You can also change this value here for the color between white and black. That's the same as changing the power from 0 to 1000 or whatever. And you can also just move the light away from the character. Sometimes it helps to have 2 windows open, and you can have one with the camera view and then the other one where you're going a bit crazy and seeing it from above and moving it around. Maybe we don't want to see the character from front on, and we would position the camera. We haven't done the camera yet, but maybe say the camera is somewhere like this. I would say traditional portraiture kind of rules, Hollywood lighting rules, is to have the side that is facing away from the camera being brighter than the side that is facing the camera. This also helps like with the separation of the subject from your background, and also, yeah, just with kind of, I'll show you, this is how it looks from this side, right? It looks very interesting, and this shadow here on the face is actually really nice. And if we see it this way, it looks really flat because we see this in way too much detail, and all of the interesting shadows are on the other side of the face that we're not seeing so much. So yeah, it really helps like thinking about this lighting from behind or lighting from the sides, not lighting from directly in front, unless you're trying to do like a flash photography looking piece. And yeah, that's kind of, for lighting, that's most of it. Something I also mentioned is to have maybe a light just for the eyes. I also usually will change these to be circles instead of squares, because you get a different shaped reflection. If I can even position this so that you see here, for instance, ooh, the reflection in the eye is a really nice circle. If I were to change the light to be a square, it's really small to see, but this reflection is a square, and usually in real life you don't see like square reflections. You would do, but not so regularly. So I always change all of the area lights to be ellipses or discs, and it also helps with like these reflections on the skin looking a little bit more kind of gradiented and soft. Cool. Right. Something else we need to add in is a background, because the camera is just in the default position, but if you were to look now, we see the landscape and it disappears off, and we have all of this area to fill. So some things that I like to do would be first to duplicate the landscape a little bit, so we can go from above and go Shift D. You can also use, for instance, the array modifier. That's really great if you wanted like a really even one. What I do is just duplicate it a few times and make the other ones really big, because they're going to be hidden in the background. If I show you hiding them, we have this horrible edge, and now unhiding them, we have kind of what's starting to look like a more natural sort of descent into a background. I might even duplicate one of them again. And if I want a nice horizon line, I don't even have to make like a new mountain. I can just take the mesh that I already had, bring the scale up, make sure that you're not bringing it like too far above the height of the others. Bring the scale up something like that. And just going from the silhouette, we have like quite a nice edge that breaks it up. I think it's good enough for now. Do you know what? I'm gonna even bring the HDRI back a little bit just so you can see, because I hit the lighting and I didn't notice all of these edges. So you want to just make sure that all of the other ones are, the meshes are below the mesh that the original character is kind of sat on, which is the problem. Okay, they're all the problem. Yeah, so it's always good just to double check when, so you don't hit render and you you have a fright. Yeah, cool. And then in terms of sky, we can go Shift A and add in another plane. And something I love to do, if you're using HDRI, this is really easy. You can make a plane. We can move it on this axis so it's kind of tilted. Make it huge, literally huge, so it fills all of the screen. And then give it a fully metallic, almost zero rough, maybe not zero roughness, but quite low roughness, quite high specular. And because I'm using a HDRI now, we get a very, it doesn't look quite like sky, but if someone were to look and not really pay attention for a second, it could look like sky. It depends on the lighting of the scene. If I were to drop down the brightness and maybe match it a little bit with the environment, it could also, I appreciate it's dark, but I'm all about these like cheap hacks and trying to speed up the workflow so that everyone gets to see like the actual the important part of the piece, which is like the centerpiece. And now I might even bring back the foliage that I hid just to see how it looks. And yeah, if I was doing this properly, I would scatter some more on the rest of the meshes. I guess actually because I duplicated they're actually hidden. So we can show these and hopefully it doesn't slow down the computing too much. Yeah, something like that. And maybe the lighting is still a bit dark. So we can add in, if you ever get a bit lost in your scene, it can happen when you have these really big objects, because Blender wants to always average the like kind of center of your point of, you know, when you're rotating like this, the larger the object, the kind of more complicated it gets. But if you click on an object and press the full stop, the period, like the dot on the right hand side where the numbers are, it's always going to zoom in to this point, and then the new point of rotation is going to be around there. So I find that really helpful. If I'm getting lost, I can just press this and come in. Something else that is super helpful, that I also didn't learn until quite far into my journey, is say I wanted to just look at this and I kind of, instead of hiding everything, select the pieces that you want to isolate and then press /, and it's going to isolate these from the rest. It's not going to hide anything, it's just going to show that in the viewport, and you can press it again and it pops right back. So this is really helpful, especially if you have like a lot of fashion things that are overlapping and you can't work out what needs changing. Yeah, so I'm just going to add in like another bigger light, maybe from above. I think something like that's better. Like I think the face is slightly overexposed, but yeah. And lighting is, for me, is really like the thing that I spend the most, I think is what I spend the most time on now. It's like something that maybe I overlooked a little bit in the beginning of my career, but it's something that even when you're really experienced, like spending still an hour 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours, like just lighting one part of the piece, like still has like big benefits of spending that time. I love like shortcuts and speeding up the workflow, but lighting is like really the one thing to not skip out on, because you can have the most beautiful crafted piece, but if you're not lighting it well to show it off, no one is going to look twice at it. Like, this is something I see with like really technical modelers, people who create these creatures that I would never ever be able to make like from scratch, and they're like ZBrush crazy sculptors, and they light it with this flat studio lighting, which has a place, but it's not super interesting. Yeah, we're still good for time, so I'm gonna go over the camera right now. I think something I've referenced a lot is like realistic kind of, or knowing photography. I'm not a photographer. If you ask me to take a photo of you IRL, I really struggle. Like, my friends ask me, I don't take good photos. I don't know how it's different in CGI and how I managed to do it, but it's definitely, I think, like a slightly different skill to learn. So yes, camera. We go Shift A. I actually already have a camera in the piece, but if you didn't, Shift A camera. I like to always use a focal length of 80 when it comes to portraiture or characters. Like, you'll notice, I'm sure everyone already knows these. I'm just going to quickly change it also to be portrait and crop to render region. This, if you're using, I'm using cycles, and if you're using Eevee, it doesn't matter, but this will hopefully speed up your viewport a bit, because it's only rendering the part that the camera can see. Right now, it's trying to render everything, and it can be quite heavy, and if you go clip to render region, it's just locking on that part. And a nice way to position the camera is to find roughly where you want the camera to be looking. Actually, because I'm also using 80 millimeters for the focal length, I quite often change the focal length in the viewport also to be 80, just to help with everything. And then you go Control-Alt-0, and it's going to snap the camera to be where you were looking. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit because it's a bit too cropped in. Super fast way to get the camera set up. And then to tweak it, I go N, come down to View, and then lock camera to View. And now I think I do want to do a bit of a 3/4 turn. Now you can just move around. Make sure you turn it off, because otherwise you're going to start looking around your scene, and you're going to... Back in the old days of Blender, if you did that, you weren't able to undo it. I would so often forget to turn it off. Now they have it built in that you can undo it, but you never used to be able to. So the camera, yeah, it looks good. We've got 80 millimeters. Some settings that can help with the photography side of things. So we have depth of field. People struggle, I think, with depth of field. I think in CGI often it's too much over the top, or they use it like too finely. And this can be, I think, maybe because it takes so long to see it in the render. So like once you've got to the stage that you're putting in the camera and you're doing all these settings, like your render might be really slow and your viewport might be too slow to see all these changes. One thing that helps is if we head back to just your normal view, you can actually see the depth of field in this view without having to see it in the render view. This is #1 time-saving tip for depth of field. You can choose to either have it focus on an object. So for instance, on the face, I think it's now focusing on, it's going to focus on the origin point of that character. It's not going to be focusing on like the top of the mesh or anything like that. We can also do it based on distance. So if I'm going to drop the f-stop so you can really see how the distance works. We can focus, this is like racking in the focus with a camera with like a manual lens. And if you wanted it, okay, say I want the focus right on the eyes, you can drop the f-stop lower than you would ever even use it, just to get it perfect. And it's like, it's only on this eye, and then I'm going to bring it up to what I actually want it to be, which is to have maybe a bit of the background blurred, and that's kind of it. It's kind of worth noting that this will slow down, having depth of field will slow down the rendering, so just bear that in mind. I don't mess around with these settings. I don't think it's worth it, but some people probably do. In the viewport display, you can also have like composition guides. You can add your like thirds in. They only appear, I think, yeah, they're too dark to see here, but you can add in your thirds. People use it for composition, your center, yeah, things like that. Something else is you can also turn up this passepartout, which blocks out the outside of the camera. And if I'm really like trying to compose a piece, I normally have this almost full to stop it like looking too distracting. Yeah, that's mostly it for the camera settings. Obviously, if you want to go crazy, you can have like fisheye lenses and things. Unfortunately, I think fisheye doesn't work in Eevee. I think it's only in cycles, and it doesn't show up in the viewport, so it's a nightmare if anyone's ever tried to use it, but it is possible. And yeah, then you have orthographic, which is like your kind of architectural perspective. And I think that's it for the lighting. I'm just checking my notes if there was anything I wanted to go over. I have some render settings that I would love to share with everyone, because this is something that a lot of people send me messages about, like very particular render settings that I have for things. I will go over everything just because I have my Blender start file set up slightly differently. It's not quite the default, so I will try and remember, but hopefully it's the same for everyone. So things like color management, this should be set to AGX. It used to, this is a new thing in Blender, it used to be filmic. You'll see when I change this color management, it looks a bit different. AGX is allegedly, for people who are like big nerds in color management, they think it's the best one. So that's why I'm using it. Make sure we have this transparent on. This is just so we don't see the HDRI. In terms of like samples and things, I like in the viewport to definitely have the denoise turned on. If you have an NVIDIA graphics card, make sure you're using optics. In the viewport, I like to set the back samples to be really high, just because I think the default one, I think default is maybe 200. And sometimes when you're rendering, you render at higher samples than this. So your render can look different to that. In the render, I then don't use the denoise. I use a different technique for denoising. And I'm usually rendering around 300 samples. I don't like using the noise threshold because sometimes this changes between different frames, and I want all the frames to be like just the same, and I don't use a time limit because it's going to take what it's going to take. And that's kind of mostly it for the render settings. Sometimes with light paths, if you have hair, particularly from DAZ models, if you have hair that has like black bits that are kind of blocky and they look like artifacts around them, you can turn the transparency up. That's going to help. Because I have a lot of glass, I'm maybe going to want to turn up the transmission. That's going to, light pass is like basically how many bounces the fake lights do when it's rendering, but normally the default settings for these are okay. One thing that is really important that a lot of people don't know about as well, if you have an animation and you have enough memory, so RAM on your computer, you can turn this setting on, persistent data. This means, so for instance, you know when you hit render, and at the top left, it has this like calculating and it goes through every single object in the scene and it like checks what objects there are. If you turn persistent data on, it doesn't do this for every single frame, and like that takes a few seconds per frame. So having this turned on for an animation it saves probably hours, I think, if you're rendering. Yeah, sorry, I was just reading the chat. I'm using Botanique for all of the graphs and stuff. And then for the denoising, I actually have it also, I have the default file changed, so I have this set up for denoising. If you don't see anything here, you want to click Use Nodes. and yours probably looks like this. So I go Shift A and go denoise to add a denoise node in, and yours won't have these settings. You want to make sure you come over here to the view layer and turn on denoising data, and take the normal into the normal and albedo into the albedo. This is kind of also maybe a little bit old school. Like when denoising was first introduced in Blender, this was faster than the like built-in denoiser. It might not be, I haven't benchmarked it recently, but this is how I like to do denoising. It's a slightly different calculation that it does basically. And that's kind of it. Yeah, it's other things like make sure you're always rendering to PNGs. You can do PNGs, you can also do, give me a second. Yeah, PNGs, JPEGs, whatever you want, it's up to you. Make sure you're not rendering to your temp folder because you might lose the files. If you're doing an animation, don't render to a video because if it crashes halfway through, you might lose your video. So always render to individual frames and then composite into a video afterwards. Yeah, and I think for now that's, oh, okay, how many resolutions? It depends. If I'm rendering like a big showstopper, I might, to be honest, I would do it something like this, like almost a default resolution, maybe a little bit bigger, and then I do 200% and then scale it down in Photoshop afterwards. This can, I like to have like a high pixel, like a DPI for the images. So if you render it at a higher resolution and then scale it down with the DPI, it can look sharper than just rendering at the smaller resolution. I always go a bit overboard. If it's for a still, like I will just whack it up and do it like 200%, 300%, kind of 1080p, something like that. If it's for an animation, HD, stick it 1920, 1080, maybe 2K above that, but it depends what the work is for, really. If it's for print, obviously huge. If it's for like a big screen, it has to be huge, but if it's just for Instagram, I'm not that I'm making work for Instagram, but if I'm kind of just playing around and I want to just get it out and show it, and it's an animation, I'll render it pretty low. It doesn't matter too much. So yeah, I think now we can move on to like official question time.
For this, I think was like super. And by reading the comments, I feel like people really enjoyed it and find it useful. So excited to see everyone's environments. Please share them with us. Also love hearing about, and like when you walked us through your use cases, I feel like the details behind them is so important, where you can't always like tell what was the actual effort and time and like details you put into them. So it was really interesting to hear that as well. Yeah, we can start the Q&A. We can spend around 15 minutes to just answer some of your questions. Also, guys, feel free to raise your hand and ask your question directly if you're comfortable, or you can just drop them in the chat and we will read them through. Yeah, I guess there are already some questions. There are some questions about lighting, and I feel like it's a difficult topic for lots of people. And I also love the details you shared, like about this Hollywood kind of, how do you call it? The Hollywood look. And if you have, Ali is asking if you have any inspirations, like the Hollywood example, and do you get inspired from any photographers or artists or cinematographers? It would be interesting to hear that.
Yeah, it's a good question actually. To be honest, I don't use references for lighting. I think I'm quite lucky that I have an almost semi-photographic brain when it comes to images. And the references I use are usually for like makeup looks for the characters, maybe general environmental kind of appearance, but I'm not using lighting references. It's kind of, I've heard about things. I've heard about things that are correct. I've heard about things that, like, I was using point lights for years. Some guy told me it was wrong, and I was like, no, but it looks good. And he was like, yeah, but it's wrong. And I was like, but it looks good, so I don't care. And I was like, I think this is really the way, like, to do it. You know, you can spend a lot of time looking at what other people are doing or listening to what is the correct way to do it. But at the end of the day, it's also up to your personal taste. And yeah, like I have looked at a lot of stage design as references, not necessarily for lighting, but yeah, I find like stage design, kind of realistic nature is really what I'm looking at more than like portrait or photography references. Yeah, I actually don't enjoy consuming photography as an art medium, which is very controversial, but
Interesting. Why so? I'm curious.
um I don't know. Yeah, maybe that's a bit one to throw out there, but it's like I I love consuming art and like I love exhibitions, but most times I see photography exhibitions, I'm just a bit like there's stuff missing, I think, from photography, and almost for me it's lost
It's
like
like
a lot of
you can do
fun.
more with 3D.
Say it again.
It's like you can do more with 3D and therefore like you can like express your vision clearly with 3D probably.
I think so. Yeah, I think maybe that's it. But yeah, I mean there are some photographers who are incredible and their work is really good, but I think there's a lot of black and white photography these days, which I can't be asked with black and white stuff, to be honest.
Ali is also asking if you prefer trial and error for the lighting and experimenting for every project all over again, or are there any tricks you apply? Um,
Yeah, I have an underwater scene set up that I have like all of this fake caustics and volumetrics and things that I sometimes use, and I was doing that for some of my older pieces, but I think now I've got kind of fast at doing it that I just build everything from scratch again. Sometimes I reuse, like for instance here, I'm reusing a character. Sometimes I will reuse an environment and change the flowers in it or change the lighting. And it's nice like to tweak things and reuse them, but I think the lighting in general, you know, you can always copy it like from another piece. You can just like copy the lights across from it, but yeah, I think right now I'm usually doing it from scratch, and it also helps like keep the work a bit more interesting and to make sure that you are progressing and you're changing your look, and sort of like still finding your artistic style in the future.
yeah, 100%. There's also a question about your avatars and skin texture. I feel like it's such a big topic. Uh, we have another workshop on the avatars. Um, but how is there like a story about how you come up with the idea of like doing these characters, or what made you or like what inspired you to do them?
I I started learning 3D. I was like self-taught in 3D. I started learning I think 7 or 8 years ago. It's been a long time actually. I think like 7 or 8 years ago. I was studying graphic design at the time. I started learning 3D, and pretty quickly I found all of these like softwares for making characters. So DAOs was one of them. There's also like Make Human. There were other ones kind of built for Blender and stuff back in the day, and I got really obsessed with them. Like I've always been really interested in bodies and people and faces, and it's just something that I've always found really interesting. And yeah, I was like doing it and just got really obsessed. In terms of like the characters, I I have a couple of tutorials on YouTube. I know that I think someone asked about the skin textures, and I have like a full deep dive into how I make the skin textures of the avatars on YouTube, and there's also a full DAS workflow on my channel, which is just Harriet Davey, I think.
I can share a link right now. So people. And there is a question from Anais. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing. Do you think that character looks better in the environment on Blender than in Unreal? And is there a specific reason why you choose to do it in Blender or Unreal?
Yeah, so I love Unreal for real time pieces, for making little games and things. I'm not great at it. Like it's so annoying to learn when you've already learned Blender that you using this other 3D software that is built completely differently. Like the way windows in it are handled and folders, I really hate it. And I'm kind of using Unreal as a means to an end. Like I have a vision of what I want to make, and I'm making it Unreal. I'm not making any animations in Unreal because I just love how Blender looks. Like I wish I could get my Unreal work to look like how my Blender work looks, because with cycles, it just like I love everything about it. And I know someone asked, I think right at the beginning, if I was using Octane, and I'm not, because it looked annoying to install and I never bothered. And so Cycles looks great. And I think you don't need to bother, even though there is Octane for free for Blender. Yeah, it's rough, like going between different softwares and trying to see which one you prefer. Obviously, I know with Unreal Engine, I could spend a week setting up the file, and then it takes a day to, not even a day, it takes like an hour to render. With Blender, it will take me an hour to set up the file, but 1 week to render. So it's kind of like deciding where I want to put my time and sink my time in. And I'm happy with Blender at the moment, and I've like worked with other people with Unreal together with projects, and like they've managed to get the work looking really good. So that's been really nice. But yeah, for now, Blender is suiting me just fine.
Do you have any recommendations for Blender tutorials, except for your channel? Are there any creative teaching?
I think also say, I don't know if it's public. I think it's public, but also on my YouTube, I have a playlist. There's, I think, over 200 for Blender tutorials that I have saved. Some of them are saved for myself to do later, because I'm obviously, everyone is still learning, but there's like over 200 videos I have saved that I've already curated. So go have a look and go learn something. But don't do
Nice,
the
yeah.
donut. Like you don't need to do the donut. The guy
I've done
sucks.
it.
Yeah, but the guy is not a nice person. So
Really, that's
yeah.
the only Blender tutorial I've ever done. It's like the first thing you Google or like find on YouTube, it's this donut tutorial, and I guess that's why people are using it. But yeah, uh, thank you for sharing the playlist. I think it would be really helpful to just go through the basics there and some like more advanced tutorials too. Um, okay, there's some more questions. Um, there are more questions about Unreal, and I think we have answered some of them. Where can we sign up for Avatar workshop? Soon. I'll announce it soon. Um, cool. I think that's pretty much it with the questions. Let me know, guys, if I missed something, because I see there are like multiple Unreal Engine questions, but I think we just covered them. There is a new question from Danny who's asking if you retouch the images after rendering or it's straight from the Blender.
Something I actually pride myself in is barely doing any retouching and getting the render to look pretty much how I want it to look in Blender. There was one example I mentioned in the talk where I like blurred out some edges of a background. That is kind of the extent to that I'm retouching images. I'm not doing any recoloring or light levels or anything like that. Like usually I'm pretty happy with how it looks on Blender, and yeah, so it definitely saves some time. Maybe not time because I'm fiddling with the lights for 6 hours in Blender, so it looks perfect. But yeah, it just I really hate bringing files into other softwares, and it saves having to do that and resaving things.
Cool. I see that people are sharing that they will publish the render they created during the session. Really excited to see it. Um,
I really want to see them. You can also send them to me on Instagram or tag me so I can see them. I would really love to see what people have made.
yeah, it would be really cool. Feel free to share it. You can also drop them in our Discord or share on social. And yeah. That was super nice. I think we can start wrapping up if there are no more questions. I see one about being recorded. Yes, it will be recorded and we will publish it on YouTube, I think, today. And I'll be sure to send a link to everyone via email, or it will be also available in our Discord. Um, how long does it take to from start to finish to create an image?
I mean, we made an image today that took an hour. So it can be really fast. But I usually, it's 1 day to a week, depending on how motivated I am or how much needs tweaking or if stuff needs making from scratch. Like the outfit for this one was made using Adobe Medium in VR. So I'm like sculpting with my VR headset. Then the clothes for all of the example ones I showed were made by other people. They're using Clo 3D. I'm sometimes making stuff in Marvelous myself, but it's a bit difficult because I'm also not a fashion designer and I find it quite hard. But yeah, the sculpting in VR is really nice and I can definitely recommend it. And I use it for a lot for like environmental pieces as well, like the big kind of abstract stuff that's in some of the other landscapes is all sculpted in VR as well. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, everyone. I had a great time and can't wait to see your stuff.
Yeah, it was so amazing. Thank you so much, Harriet. I feel like it was a very effective and also beginner-friendly workshop. And I will also spend some time creating my environment. And I'll share it with everyone as well. I'm also going to share our Discord link so you can all find the recording there. But again, it will be shared via email as well. And yeah, please also check our platform. We have some of the most amazing designers in the space, and I know a lot of designers here are attending and watching, so we would love to showcase your pieces as well.